Oh, here we go. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I don't know if we got recorded or not. People
Maybe-
can hear who we
Okay,
are,
I'm going
but
to
that's
repeat
okay.
that for the viewing audience.
Okay.
Our mics were muted. So tonight we have a presentation by Rick Winterhalter of Clackamas County, and he's going to speak to us about the current state of recycling. And so welcome, Rick. Thank you. And our committee members that are present this evening are Doug Neely, Dorothy Dalsrud, and Trent Warnes. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Pete, and committee members. I appreciate being here today, and you will notice that, so I'm going to talk a little bit today. I think I was asked, you guys have probably been reading the paper and seeing a lot of, what's going on and what is going on in the world of recycling. And so I'm going to kind of go through that really quickly. And I left Dylan's name on here, my friend with the Recycling Partnership, because I really just stole his slides because they're a great guideline. And so I'm going to kind of go through those and update them. As you can see, it's from 2017. And the one thing that is the biggest truism of this current situation in recycling is it is constantly changing. I just read some things today that changed, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So anyway, again, the Recycling Partnership, and I'll just, I want to give them a plug because they have sponsors in packaging and that sort of thing, but they're doing a lot of work helping communities get carts out there. I can't remember how many carts, but they've done, things in a lot of smaller cities and provided a lot of work. So it's a great organization, and they have a national perspective, and we're fortunate because a couple of the folks, and this gentleman as well, lives here in Portland, and so we get a lot of their benefit.
Oh, lives there in Portland.
It lives, yeah, in Portland, yeah. So anyway, so I'm kind of talk a little bit, just like Dylan has up here, where did it come from, what's the national sword, and kind of, why does it matter to us, and what can we do as citizens about it, and that's kind of where I'm ultimately going to get to. But I know you folks, and I know that Mr. Herman certainly would have an interest, as I learned some of my recycling things from Jerry when I started working. So and even before I started working at the county, and so he was very instrumental in educating me. So anyway, what's going on? China is, they're tightening the screw. They're making a lot of changes. What is this national sword? It's really the important thing to remember that it is a government policy. The businesses behind that government policy really want all of our materials. They kind of want the materials, but it's really about inspecting plastics. It's just that they've been getting a lot of things we'll talk about, garbage that they've been getting. But, they have 900 facilities. They inspected 590 that had rule violations. Several were closed. So they've just been, really cramping down. And in July 18th last year was when the World Trade Organization put out a notice that said, they had 4 classes of scrap and 24 individual things that they were talking about, individual items like 3 through plastic lids, plastic bottles, unsorted mixed paper, textiles, some glass and metals. They just kind of don't, they were just kind of clamping down. So some of the things that they do is, and some of this gets a little bit into the weeds, but it's like their import licenses, they're not being renewed. So brokers that move our material, they can no longer find, a place for the material to go. Customs enforcement in ports, in the Chinese ports, they were starting to really enforce on their rules. And now, just recently, within this past month, they've required that they're required that their certified inspectors need to check all loads coming to them from the States, and actually from from throughout the world. This is a world issue. So and there are only 50 of them in the States. So what this does is it starts 50 for the whole United States. And so, what this does is, there's stuff moving all the time, and so it slows everything down. And so these are the things that start affecting us here. And loads have been rejected, and they will, in some cases, it will be an item that's in a bale and the whole container load is rejected. Whereas before, those kinds of things happened all the time, and they would work with our MRF operators and with the brokers, and there'd either be a deduction or something would happen. And so if all of a sudden a load is rejected and it's gonna come back to the States, and that could be, it could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars to do that, right? Because material coming back this way, it's more expensive because empty containers, because lots of material being produced in China that's
So is
coming here.
China the biggest consumer of these?
Yes, and
recyclable
I'm going to get into
Okay.
that because that really is the thing. And as I mentioned, it is mostly a political issue, and the reason is they really want to clean up. China really wants to clean up, their own environment. They have a lot of small mills, and especially plastic mills and that sort of thing, as well as having state of the art, and they really kind of want to weed those out, and so that's why they want to get more cleaner material in, and they also want to begin sourcing from their own, growing middle class. So they really want to start and try to do a lot of that, trying to eliminate polluters, trying to grow in their own domestic source, and that's really the big thing. And I thought this headline, Xi's speech, had 89 mentions of the environment, just 70 of the economy, and I thought that was interesting. So this trend just kind of gets to, what you were talking about, that 30% of all the recyclables collected are exported outside the U.S. Hong Kong and China, 69%. And then we'll see some for all U.S. exports for plastic. So this is kind of not everything, so
So I presume what China's doing impacts Hong Kong too. They're not taking it either?
no.
Yeah.
No. So China consumes 55% of the world's scrap paper. 2016, 37 million metric tons went outside the U.S. 44% of that was to China. We have all this scrap fiber going to China. The Institute, ISRI is the Institute of Scrap Recycling and Institute of Scrap Recycling Industries. 18% of scrap exports are at risk due to the ban. And so this is kind of interesting. Prohibitive content, that's the things, you don't want in a bale. And so they're talking about that, that they were talking in the beginning of going to like 0.3% down from 2%, which is what it had been. And they landed actually on 0.5%, and that's where they are. 0.5% is about one paper cup in a 1,500-pound bale.
Wow.
So that kind of gives you
Doesn't take
a
much.
sense. And we don't have a lot of excess domestic capacity, especially for paper fiber. And so, we've, many of our domestic mills here are closed down because the paper manufacturing is being done overseas. And so they need the paper there to make the boxes, et cetera. And so that's where the largest, in the United States in the past 15, 20 years hasn't built any new de-inking mills, which would be the kind that could use recycled paper, which we had two mills here in
Oregon.
in Oregon that were consuming a lot of our mixed fiber, Newburgh and Blue Heron. So anyway, so all of that, that's, I guess the thing is, these are global economic issues that, we can't do anything about in so many ways. So how do we react to that? So there's a lot of impacts, there's a lot of uncertainty. China still wants the material, so West Coast, the one thing that we've been talking about, Vietnam, Malaysia, those countries have been taking some of that material, but they certainly can't consume what China does, and they don't have the deep water ports to kind of take in a lot of that material, but they were still, and then we just heard, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, so Vietnam is saying, or a month ago, Vietnam is saying that they're full up too, and so they can't take any more. So this does a lot of things, in the recycle market, because you have now, if all of that capacity means that if, for example, in cardboard, if you have all that capacity not being utilized, then all of that excess capacity they're putting onto domestic mills, well, what happens? Price is going way down. So you have this combination that in order to try to clean up this material, to make the markets, our material recovery facilities locally are having to slow down, add more labor, in order to try to sort the material out. So that's kind of what's going on there, and I'm just gonna skip ahead because some of that, we'll talk about, what we can do to clean up our recycling stream and that sort of thing. So, so when we get to that, we get to the point of what, like I said, domestic mills. So how did we get here? In a way, so years ago, domestic mills, beginning probably in 2005, 6, really started quality control, and they wanted more quality. And there's several things going on. In our business, we kind of call the change in the recycling bin kind of the evolving ton. Because as you know, when our program started, piles of newspaper looked like newspaper. I kind of wish I had pictures now, how many newspapers are there? But so the scrap paper grew, and then when we commingled things, which, we should have the ability to sort those out if only the things that are on our list
Go in
the bin.
Right.
So we get some things that aren't on the list in the bin, and they cause some problems, and we'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But so the evolving ton, all of these things, China, then when our domestic mills were saying, hey, we have to sort all this out. We're not sure we can use that fiber. They've had to change their chemistry, do some things anyway. So and then China came around and said, hey, we'll take it all mixed. So, that was like a decade ago, or a little over a decade ago. MRF operators, material recovery facility operators, they're rational economic beasts. They behave, they like, okay, well, that's what we're going to do. And we all, kind of relied on it, and things went along pretty good for a while. But now we're really, we had a slowdown in 2013. I don't know if you remember, there was a thing called the Green Fence, real similar to this. They, raised the issue that, hey, we have these standards on our books, and we're gonna start enforcing them. Well, they did for a while, and we all got panicky, and then they said, oh, never mind, we're just kidding, and we went back to, our kind of our ways and of doing things, and so how's Oregon doing? If we look across the West Coast, we're doing pretty good. We talk about our contamination and, the garbage that's in this, in the bins, people putting things in there that shouldn't be there. But our residual, and we talk about this a lot, that what actually gets thrown away at the end of the day was about 9%. And if you look across and you go to Seattle, you go to LA, you go to some other places on the West Coast, and there can be above 20%. So our material's pretty good, but it's a blip,
So that's
on the scene.
9% of the actual recycling waste stream gets thrown away?
So of what we set out at the curb, about 9% of that winds up getting thrown away.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just as residual. When we just had the bin and very, and fewer materials, we were kind of running in the 1.5% to 2% residual, because we had 4 commodities. Everything was pretty clean. We were pretty stringent about leaving notes when people did it wrong, and we kind of stopped doing that. When we got to the carts and the automated and all that, as my colleague said one time, the lid hides many sins. And give Joanne all credit, but it's true. And there's just been some changes over the years with these other communities, and even trying to recycle some of this other stuff, and grocery stores having drop-offs, and people think, okay, what can be recycled at a grocery store, so I should be able to put it in my bin. Not the case. So, so what are we doing about all this right now, statewide and regionally, locally? We are, the DEQ, Metro, local governments throughout the region and throughout the state have been meeting kind of regularly as we were wont to do, but to try to figure out what we're going to do. And not only the government entities, but we also assembled all, brokers and the MRF operators and the collectors and all of the industry people, which is kind of the Oregon way. And we've gotten some kudos from our colleagues in either state, north and south, for doing that. I mean, we were pretty quick about putting that together and finding out what's going on. One of the things that all of the material within the state flows into the material recovery facilities that are here in the metro region. Some of those facilities or some of those programs in Southern Oregon particularly, have chosen to change their list right away to, and change what they're collecting and stop sending material up here. And DEQ has allowed some material to be disposed that is collected for recyclables, but overall only about 2% of the material that's been collected for recyclables since January has met that fate. So here in the region, our material recovery facilities, there are a couple things that they'd like us to change on the list, but we're not inclined to change the list. We kind of want to keep the status quo because the material is moving, even though the facilities have to slow down their belts, as I said earlier, put on a little more labor. And so it's costing them more. Their risk is a little bit higher. So all of a sudden we noticed that the processing cost increased almost 5 times in, a month's time. So, our collectors were experiencing, higher costs of an allowable cost. And so we in the county have increased our rate in a large way, but the material that we're collecting for recycling is still finding its way to markets. So that's what we've been told in the updates from the material recovery facilities. So, but it does bring us, so that's what we're doing, working on some long-term strategies. We may do, we may go and change a collection system. We don't know, we might separate fiber and plastic and, in containers and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of things in the air and may do some other things, reinvestment in the facilities that we have here right now, because there just hasn't been a need to because of, the way material flowed. So anyway, that's kind of what's going on. The biggest thing and the only thing that we can do is eliminate contamination. It's the only thing we can do as citizens, as folks. We have a recycling list. We have a recycling guide. Counties do. The city does. We distribute those often. And I beg people to trust us that these truly are the only things that we can recycle curbside, and that's, I think, this just the most important thing and the thing that everybody can do. Because if we do that, because if you're putting in contamination, then effort is spent pulling those materials off, and that's, that's where the problem comes. I mean, we can do some more positive sorting instead of having to get rid of the trash. So,
What are some of the biggest culprits as far as contamination?
Trent, you are here. You are my segue. So, we did. The county just did a tag study where we went, like I mentioned, when we started, and I think people may remember, we had bins out. All the collectors left bin. Yeah, thanks. All the collectors, would leave behind. They had 2-part notes, and they'd leave them because they could see, what was there, and they'd leave a note. They might take the recyclables and leave the non-recyclables, and it was all part of the education program. And we've gotten away from that, and so we were looking at. So several folks throughout the country have done tagging programs. Our tags, again, I'm going to give a shout out to the Recycling Partnership because we really kind of we stole their design and worked with them on their design but kind of looked at what were our top contaminants. And so we have the OOPS tags, which are red, and we have the nice job tags, so just for those people that do, do the right thing. And the gold star was recommended by our consultant, and so we did put the gold star on there. They said people just, they like that. And so we tried this in a few neighborhoods, and essentially it was a lift the lid, observe if there's anything on the top, any of the bad items on the top, or if they had done a good job, not digging around and doing that thing. But we just kind of wanted to get an understanding of what was out there, how this tagging would work, what could we do going forward. So we're exploring some of those things. So to Trent's question, the biggest item was a clamshell. Terrible picture, I apologize, but we all know what those are. So to-go containers, clamshells. The other big one, plastic bags. And, not much by weight, but, just by volume, there's a lot in there. And there's the real problem.
Could I ask you a question on
Of
plastic
course, yes.
bags? Some of the stores are taking them. Do they actually have something to do with them, or are they just providing convenience?
Oh, absolutely, no. The stores, that's where we really encourage everybody to take it back to retail, because that's where it will get recycled. The stores have, they'll take it back. I know the bigger stores that I'm familiar with take that material back to their distribution centers. They load up, a semi-truck as the manufacturer, and the majority, I would say, over 90% of these are going to Trex, the composite lumber maker, so in Nevada. And so that's where those are going. Yeah, in the store, they go take it back, take all those bags we put back, put them in a vertical baler there, and bale up a little, 1,000-pound bale and shove it on the back of a truck, and it goes to Trex. So, and not only the bags, but it's important too that and you start collecting this, but the wrap around your toilet paper, that around the water bottles, that sort of thing, that can go in there too. So all that stretchy kind of film can go in there. Produce bags, those types of things.
Have you seen a reduction of this kind of contaminant in recycling with
Absolutely
some of the cities with banning it and stuff like that? No? Like,
You have all the right questions. And interestingly enough, that where I got the study we did several years ago where we got the 9% residual, Portland, wanted, of course, they wanted, to make sure they did a statistical, test on how are the bags in the Portland bins or carts versus out and about in the rest of the region. Portland had about 5 bags per the study, whereas the rest of the regions were about 17.
okay.
So if that policy was implemented across the region, and if it had the same effect, we'd be 7 million bags fewer in the recycling system. And this is why. This is one of the biggest problems. These metal things that you see here, they're called screens, and they move a flat piece of cardboard up, they spin, and smaller items fall through the spaces, containers and that sort of thing. So it's designed to separate the kind of the two-dimensional paper from the containers that can fall through. I mean, some of the bigger containers will go through. Well, these wrap around these screens. Every shift, every material recovery facility has to put somebody on there 15, 20 minutes, whatever, to kind of get that stuff off of there in order to get the machine to function correctly. And so, it just gets worse and worse and worse, through the shift. And so that just means the sorting gets worse and worse and worse. So that's why. I mean, it's a serious problem. And one material recovery facility operator said that they probably spend, over $100,000 a year on, doing this because of the, so more than 1 or 2 people. So those were the 2 biggest of, so the bags and the clamshells were the biggest. And then, of course, styrofoam containers, things like that. But those were the 2 biggest. And so we're really thinking those are things we really want to target. And then of the third biggest category that they saw was other, and of the other, the largest was paper towels and napkins, which really surprised me. I did not expect that at all.
Yeah, not recycling, no.
Right? It just really surprised me. And then the coffee cup, single-use coffee cup, wound up being in there, and styrofoam packaging. So those were all those are all the biggest contaminants, and we really, that's kind of where our efforts are going now, is to really focus on that, because, you know, global manufacturing economy, the global commodity markets, you know, those things we can't do anything about, and, you know, we count on our facility operators to, you know, find places for that to go. This is how they make their money, so that's what they're doing. One other thing, and I think Dorothy kind of reminded me of it a little earlier, but one thing to think about as well with the curbside bins is, you know, all of the beverage containers, with the recent expansion of the refund, beverage container refund program, almost all beverage containers now, with the exception of liquor and wine and a few, and some of the larger juices and that sort of thing, but all the single use now are, you know, a dime, you know, refund value. So, I mean, I say to people often, if they, you know, I see their dimes, I say, you're just throwing, I just reach in my pocket and say, that's what you're throwing in your recycle bin. Don't do that and get it to the, you know, the bottle drops, and, or take it to the stores that still collect it. But to get that redeemed, because that material, because it's so segregated already, you know, it's not mixed in with paper, it's not mixed in with other things, that at least in the, you know, the soda bottles and water bottle material that's called PET, that material definitely receives a higher value when it goes through that system versus going through the material recovery facility. The material's still being recovered, but a higher value and a better chance of it to be recovered, because at the material recovery facilities, you know, those bottles, some of those bottles, you know, now are just so thin. I mean, they get flat. And when they get flat, they go in with the paper. It gets lost, you know,
totally
you can't
makes
see
sense.
it, right? So you can't see it anymore. So, yeah, keep those things out and make sure they get hidden, and then all of a sudden you're at 3% contamination, you know, in a bale or something. So that's where the challenges are. And I'll stop talking.
On the, you know, when Blue Heron closed, they said it was because of they couldn't afford they couldn't afford the paper, all that newsprint was going to China. And I know B&B Leasing has indicated that they lose money picking that stuff up. Where should the newspapers go to? Can they go into your regular recycle?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, that absolutely can go in your recycling bin.
Okay.
Yeah. And, you know, it's important to note, I mean, you know, the money thing's quick. I mean, it's our responsibility, it's my responsibility at the county, and that's one of the things I do, is to make sure that if we want these programs to succeed, and I think Oregonians have come to expect this, because we value the public goods that it provides, because when these materials are used in manufacturing, there are a lot of environmental benefits that accrue to the manufacturers, whether it's a glass plant where they would, you know, extend the life of a furnace between the, you know, cleanings and that sort of thing, because you know, the cullet burns at a lower temperature, and so, you know, so they get that. You know, the resource of Lyman, you know, that sort of thing isn't the biggest savings, but that furnace life and that energy use is. And so that's one thing. Using plastics and, you know, into new plastics or into new materials is, you know, there's a demand for this material. You know, there's still a demand for the material despite what the commodity prices are doing. There's an in demand. And right now, especially in plastics, you have such low oil prices that competes with your recycle prices a lot. So, and those things are perfect substitutes for one another, and so they certainly, you know, follow the trend and that sort of thing. But, yeah, so that's. that's kind of what's going on there.
You just mentioned a couple of other countries that were taking material, and you say Vietnam has kind of tightened the screws on it too, so
They've just
are
run out.
are there other countries that you think would be interested in taking the material or not?
Well, the material is moving, albeit slowly, and albeit there are challenges. It's not the giant sucking sound. So we don't. I mean, we're told right now. I mean, things are stacking up a little bit, but everybody's moving material. So whether it's domestic, our cardboard, really the majority of that stays domestic. So a lot of that stays domestic. A lot of the plastics are staying domestic. Right now, they're finding other places for it to go. So it's just that they're just having to search out for new markets that they didn't have before. The prices might not be as good, all of that, but they want to move material. That's what they do. You know, that's their business. So, and the thing about Vietnam and some of the other Southeast Asians is some of the Chinese, some of the Chinese folks are, you know, putting processing down in there. There's a lot of things going on that, you know, might be questionable behavior, and so those are the things that I think are pushing the buttons for the Chinese government more than any, you know, a lot of stuff. So I've taken a lot of your time.
Well, so a lot of it is education to the people. I know that I have 3 apartments, and I go through a whole recycling thing with each one of my tenants. I show them exactly what to put in, what they can't, and I wave a finger telling them that I've gotten this, really from people opening my stuff and throwing in. I went, that's not my recycle, we don't need this. And so but then I noticed that they'll argue with me. They'll be good for a while, then they argue with me and say, well, this is recyclable. It says right there. And I go, no, it's, you know, some of it's just education. You know, I'll argue about those clamshells with them. I said, it's not recyclable, put it in the garbage can. No, but it
Has
is.
the number on the bottom, so it is.
I had a car fender in my recycle. They said, but it's recyclable. All car stuff is recyclable. No, it's not. But so, and that's people I've given stuff to directly that are fairly educated. I mean, are pretty educated people.
Yeah.
And you still have to argue with them about what's recyclable. Just to take it one step further, I collect bottles for Oregon City Parks Foundation. I have a route of about 20 different places, public and city, that are contributing and collecting bottles for us. There are some people that make it so nice and clean and you can't believe them. You turn around and go, why am I got bananas in here and lunches? Where it's really clearly marked. So some of it is just laziness and so, but I also found that when things are free, it used to be before they took all the bottles, 1/3 of the stuff I sorted, I had to recycle. Now that they take so many bottles, it makes things so much easier. But it's amazing how many people crush a bottle and or throw it with 1/3 of liquid away. I have to physically empty those out, otherwise you don't get paid for it. Why, and who wants to send more liquids off into a factory? Those people have to empty that.
Sure.
It takes up so much time, but it's, there has to be a huge public awareness, you know, specials on television, commercials and stuff that show those pictures. I've argued the bag with my tenants.
I do see,
Keep
I pulled the bags out of my garbage. I'm going, you can't put these in, and I save them all. I don't even take a plastic bag from a grocery. I loop my arm and I have them in my car, you know. But,
yeah, we
But-
can make news items very easily on our homepage and just rotate them as needed. So in terms of at least using social media or websites for the cities in Clackamas County, I'm sure Oregon City could partner up a little better than we have been and get the word out more. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things, I'm glad you brought that up, Pete. We have been kind of, because the county does a lot of the education and that sort of thing throughout for the cities within
Yeah.
agreement with the city. And we've been meaning to reach out and kind of reconnect with folks doing the city newsletters and that sort of thing in all of the areas. We provide content. We have on occasion. Right now we're in summer event season, so we're a little busy. You know, the person who's responsible for that's a little busy, but we are going to be reaching out and trying to reconnect with folks.
Yeah.
really help get that out. We do our county mailer that goes to everybody, and that's helpful, but.
I made
do
copies of
things
those
all the
county,
time.
I made copies of those mailers and gave them to my tenants. I still have the original one.
Good deal.
It's kind of to your point a little
Yeah.
bit that we do this all the time. Sometimes it's frustrating. It's like, I'm not very good at what we do because of, this continuing contamination. I kind of had the experience that you've had, and we at times we've said, when you're in doubt, throw it out.
Right.
But they're not in doubt. There's no doubt. This item,
Well, yeah, when the,
this clamshell is recyclable.
well, and it
It's
has
right
the
there.
little,
Have it-
has the
it's
little
got-
triangle thing on it,
Yeah.
oh, yeah.
So an important thing about that triangle thing is that it is called a resin identification code. It is not a recycling symbol.
Okay.
That's when in '91 that's what it was, but it de facto has
I mean,
become
most
that.
people think, oh, it's
Yeah.
that's
That's a
recycling.
I just
That's
learned
a
that.
big
I just learned something new
miscommunication.
today.
Yeah.
That's very
absolutely
interesting.
nothing to do.
I'm kind of wondering if you could, and of course, you'll have, it's a budgetary thing too, but you're saying this is event season, so you get overwhelmed.
No, not-
I don't
not
mean to
me.
sidetrack this, but I'm kind of wondering if you couldn't have a side committee people that would go to things like movies in the parks and have a little working station, because who we need to really teach are our younger people.
That's a
You
fantastic
know,
idea.
But again, you need volunteers and you also need budgets and then.
If
But-
you have events that want, Stacy Luddington in our office, she has a cadre of master recyclers. There's a program that comes around once a year at the county that's called Master Recyclers. And it's I want to say 6 weeks, I might have that wrong, but if you look up the Master Recycler program and they go through, it's based on the Master Gardener program, so you go through, you're trained on what's going on in recycling and throughout the community and in recycling and reuse and waste prevention ideas, and then they give back to the community in a variety of ways. Sometimes business people will, folks will come from their business and they'll create a green team or something like that, or they'll do
Right.
table at events. We table at the farmer's market, Milwaukee and City of Oregon City. A reuse fair this weekend, actually a repair fair is gonna be happening this weekend at the Saturday farmer's market up on the hill. So if you have a small appliance or a computer or something you want repaired, bring it up. It's gonna be some volunteers, so.
The Parks Department, until the foundation came out there and into the conscious of the park, they were not putting the recycles out there because you just get filled with other garbage. And now it's basically policed by the volunteers that are there, so that doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
It's good. Anything else? I could,
Well, thanks for
Trash all that.
coming. We will
Absolutely.
instruct the other members to
So,
go
I-
online and see the video.
This picture, I would say the wheat-free could be recycled and I would tell them the rigatoni could not because it would be wax
neither of
covered.
those can.
See, there you go, I'm bad too, I just had to
Those are-
test myself
That was
on
the
that.
last contaminant that I'd forgotten was on there, and that's the freezer boxes. Anything coming out of the freezer can't go. So,
Yeah.
and that's one of the ones
Oh,
that's
that's
confusing.
waffle, not crackers.
Yeah. And that's part of the confusion, It
Yeah.
kind of looks like.
'cause it's
Well, it looks
wax.
like a
You think it's
cereal
cardboard,
box.
yeah.
Right, looks like a cereal box, but if it's in the freezer, just say no.
Okay, because it has wax and plastic on it.
It's
okay.
saturated.
Yeah,
with
that's, I don't
kinds
do
of
that.
stuff that just doesn't come out in the paper making process.
I have one other comment I wanted to make. These plastic bags are a headache there at Arlington. I did a tour there, and they say the biggest problem they have is the wind picking up the plastic bags as they're emptying out their
Yeah,
containers.
yeah. And if they get to the Columbia, then they go
Yeah.
to the ocean, and then here we
Yeah.
are. So, yeah, that's a huge issue for them, and they fly everywhere. Keeps those litter fences busy working. I did bring a couple handouts that I'll leave for you guys on, a little green cleaner. We always have something to hand out. And then, kind of fruit and vegetable storage tips, because that preventing food waste is really
A
important.
big part.
Yeah.
Great.
I'll take them for our little,
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thanks,
thank you
Rick.
very, very much.
Eat the leftovers.
Appreciate. Yeah.
You do.
Thanks, Rick. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Well, Pete,
Yeah,
I
one
think you're
more.
on, or will be.
Yeah. Doesn't look like we have anybody present for public comments, so.
Nope.
Bear with me, I'm gonna navigate to the city homepage because I want people to see where we have put the materials for the, the Equitable Housing Project. So I'm gonna go to this Oregon City homepage, and I'll go to the Planning Department. And over here, folks have probably already received these green cards in the mail if you're a property owner. And the green cards are a legal notice that the city is about to start the public hearing process to adopt the equitable housing code proposals. So that's what I'm going to talk about this evening is the status of that project and what it's all about. So when you go to this homepage that I'm on, at the bottom of the page, there are a lot of documents, but the one that I'm going to open up and use as our presentation is this presentation of major changes. And use that as our presentation. So one moment. And this is the same presentation that we provided to the Planning Commission on Monday night, and which is being presented to the Neighborhood Association this evening for McLaughlin. The City Commission adopted some goals, and those are related to the current situation that we have with, not only with a big homeless problem, but also with increasing housing prices and a lack of housing supply that leads to an overall lack of housing availability that affects the most vulnerable members of the population. And what the planning department is tasked to do was to look at the development code to see whether or not there are barriers to other types of housing that are more available to all segments of the population, including folks that live here and work here. And there's a term that we use for that called the missing middle. And so this is housing that is available to people that earn a wage and live and work here, but just can't seem to make ends meet. And it's a consequence of a lot of factors. You know, the Portland metro area is booming and driving housing prices up. There are portions of the urban growth area that are, like the west side is booming, and there's a lot of people moving there, and there are larger expansions of the urban growth boundary over there. So as this ties back to land use planning, we have a statewide set of planning goals that some of those require that we plan for urban growth and we have an adequate land supply for all kinds of land uses, including residential and mixed use and commercial. It's a 20-year land supply obligation that the cities must meet. And the way that we do that is through working with Metro, who controls the urban growth boundary and does an analysis of the UGB and determines whether it needs to be expanded and where it needs to be expanded. And when that occurs, the cities are responsible for implementing the urban growth boundary through their comprehensive plans and their zoning ordinances. And that's where it comes down to. I'll move on. So what are we proposing with the Equitable Housing Code changes? Most of these changes are identified to support and incentivize diverse, quality, physically accessible, affordable housing choices with access to opportunities, services, and amenities, as well as the removal of barriers in the code. There are some other code changes that are not termed equitable housing. In this presentation, the equitable housing code changes are identified with a little green house. And the other code changes, which are mostly housekeeping and cleanup code changes, process improvements are not denoted that way. There's a very broad definition for equitable housing, and it can mean different things to different people. But basically what it means is that you have a choice to buy or rent housing that is accessible to all ages, abilities, and incomes, and that housing is convenient in regards to its location and proximity to public transportation, schools, healthcare, food, and parks. So where we plan for housing is just as important as what type of housing it is. So that includes proximity to the transportation corridors that are designated bus routes, which have bicycle access, good pedestrian connections, and all of those things do contribute to what makes equitable housing. It's not just the housing itself. The census data that we have, which is 2010, there is some more recent data, but the most recent data that we've used for this analysis was 2010, indicates that for Oregon City, the housing choices are broken down as follows. 71% of our housing is single-family detached housing. That's really no surprise because Oregon City evolved that way, and most cities have. We do have a bigger proportion of a slightly smaller proportion with multifamily, which is defined as 5 or more units. And then these other categories include manufactured homes, multiplexes, which we're calling 3 to 4 plexes that are attached units, and duplexes, and townhomes. And there are also other things that we'll talk about. And what are people in Oregon City paying for housing? If you use the 35% mark that says if you're spending more than 35% of your income on housing, either renting or through your mortgage, you're considered cost burdened. And in Oregon City, homeowners with a mortgage constitute about 24%. Homeowners without a mortgage, 10% in this category. Renters, about 40%. And combined citywide, that's 27%. So about a quarter of our households are paying more than 35% of their income on housing, which is considered unaffordable. Yeah.
The percentages are confusing me a little bit.
Yeah.
Combined citywide, what does that mean? Obviously, it's not the others added up.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of
Is
an
this the
average.
difference between 100%?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right, Doug.
Okay.
Thanks. So,
The
just,
title you might want to rename because it's not clear.
How can homeowners without mortgages be in the unaffordable 10%?
that's a good question.
I mean, I suppose that could happen, but
Yeah.
I guess if you
They've-
didn't have a mortgage, but your property, you weren't
Your
making enough-
taxes.
Yeah, your taxes, I know.
And say you've paid it
Yeah,
off, but
you
your
paid it off, but
taxes are
you don't have a
unaffordable.
huge, like if
Yeah.
you're retired or something, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that
Okay, I
would,
got
that
you.
would make sense.
Yeah,
So that's
okay.
affecting potentially
Yep.
our older population.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, good point. Right, so. Just wanted to point out, and this was pointed out on the legal green card notice, that this proposal doesn't change the actual zoning map. The proposals here are to the zoning code. And it also doesn't mean that the city is constructing anything or building anything, so it's not a notification for that. How much public involvement are we doing for this project? This is a list of all the meetings that we've presented this project on, and it involves the initial project advisory team formation. We have a project advisory team of 15 members. That includes people from throughout Oregon City and all walks of life. It is pretty diverse, and we got a lot of applicants that had never really been involved in city government when we put the word out that this project was coming in. Got a lot of people who got involved because they are facing housing problems and needed and wanted to be involved. And then we also have the Planning Commission representatives, City Commission, and other nonprofit agencies, as well as a technical advisory committee. So on the right-hand side of this chart, there are, mostly these meetings are upcoming, and I'll have a separate slide at the end of the meeting that tells you all the upcoming schedule for the process. We have a project website, and we have held 5 meetings of our project advisory team so far. So as I mentioned earlier, we call this housing the missing middle because most of what we see in our housing stock is either single-family detached or apartments. What we don't see a lot of is the duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, et cetera. And you do see a lot of this kind of diversity in the older parts of town, like McLaughlin and that sort of thing, because it's evolved organically over time and in response to economic factors like World War II, when a lot of people came back and there was a need to provide instant housing and that sort of thing. So what's interesting is when you compare the newer parts of the city to the older parts of the city, and you see some of that diversity, that is not only providing that additional housing need, but it also is compatible with the adjacent single-family neighborhoods in some cases. In some cases, it's not, but, you know, that's a lot of question of design. So all of the things that I referred to on the website are detailed code changes. We're not going to go into those. We're just trying to keep this at a high level. If people want to go in and see what the code changes are, they're all redlined, and the existing code is, you know, either shown as struck out or add additions to it, so you can look at each of the code chapters and see what the changes are. But this will be an overview of what those code changes are. And they're going to be, I'm going to discuss these by unit type. So I need to explain this chart at the bottom. We have, the line at the top indicates that a change in the code is proposed. The green color indicates that single-family detached homes are already a permitted use in this zone district that it mentions. Whether it's red means that it's not permitted in the R2 zone. So what's changing in this slide is basically nothing. Single-family detached homes in all of the residential districts are always going to continue to be a permitted use. And most of the changes will come with other types of housing. So with this, there are some modifications to our single-family design standards that make that simpler, and that includes making the setbacks for all of the zones they will match one another. Currently, they are, for a particular zone, it'll say 7 foot on one side and 9 foot on the other. In this case, it's going to say 7 foot in a certain zone or 5 foot in a certain zone. Mm-hmm.
Could you explain that? Where are you? I was at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah, could you explain that a little bit better?
So, for example, in the R10 low-density zone,
Right.
which is a lot of the zoning.
It's amazing that a 10,000 square foot lot is called low density, but that's okay.
Yeah, that is considered a low-density lot in the metro area. That has setbacks that are, I believe, 9 foot on one side and 7 on the other. Maybe it's 8 and 10, right? So, and it makes it a little hard to figure out what it is, depending on where you are. The majority of construction will go with the smaller setback and then leave the larger setback as a side yard. So this isn't a huge change. It does provide adequate separation from the property line, but it makes it simpler for people to build and administer. Yeah.
Right.
And that was agreed to by the project advisory team. They thought that was a good recommendation. Next thing we'll talk about are townhomes. Currently, under existing code, townhomes are only permitted in the medium density R35 zone. And the proposal here is to allow townhomes in the R5, which is 5,000 square foot lot per unit, 5,000 square feet per unit, as well as in the highest density R2 zone as well. The lower density zones, R10, R8, and R6 would not be affected. They would not be, you wouldn't be able to do a townhome in those zones. With the addition of this townhome type to the R5 and R2 zones, you will be required to show that you have at least 3,500 square foot minimum lot size. So if you have an R5 zoned lot that has to be at least 3,500 square feet, you can build a townhouse on it. And in the R2 zone, it's pretty much the same as the requirement for an apartment. You got to have at least 2,000 square feet per unit. The other thing that happens with this is a requirement that you share driveways, which is something that's already in the code, but it just helps keep the driveway cuts manageable on the street. Accessory dwelling units have long been permitted in the city with virtually all of our zones. The only change with this is that they would now be permitted in the R2 zone in addition to apartments. So if you had a regular apartment unit, you could build a small accessory unit in it as well. With accessory dwelling units, we are going to be we have a brochure that will help people navigate the ADU process with likely costs that they would incur so that they can predict whether or not it's a worthwhile economic decision for them to build one of these. There would be a 20-foot maximum height limit. This change does allow you to increase more of your lot to accommodate an ADU, and it allows for a slightly bigger ADU than was previously permitted. So it was previously 40% of your existing dwelling, and this proposal would allow it to be larger. Still require that it be the exterior building materials be compatible. Next category that we're talking about is our manufactured home parks. So we have 4 existing manufactured home parks in the city limit and 6 in the urban growth boundary out in the county. And those are currently considered non-conforming uses under the R3.5 zone. So that puts them in a position that they can't do anything without a conditional use, which is a process that is pretty onerous for someone who just wants to add a couple of manufactured homes or modify an open space or add a play area or something like that. So the proposal here is to make them a permitted use in the R3.5 zone. And along with those, some design standards which closely resemble the state manufactured home park code. So it would put us more in line with manufactured home park code.
Just on the conditional use, that means
Yeah.
the building was already there before you had the designation.
That's
And so they're
right.
permitted to be there, but once that building is removed, then they can't be there in that form.
Yeah, currently the code is silent on this housing type, and it's a bit of an omission that shouldn't be there. We had a manufactured home park ordinance at one point, and it went away in 2004, and rendered these parks lawfully pre-existing non-conforming uses, which has a lot of ramifications for someone who wants to just either maintain it or expand it to add a few more units. They do represent a good affordable option for people. They allow people to, build wealth, if not necessarily equity in the housing market, but they can certainly have and they're located in areas that are in good proximity to amenities right now. So transit corridors and that sort of thing. The likelihood that we would see new manufactured home parks developed in, for example, the concept plan areas that might be zoned R3.5 in the future, it is unknown. It's probably pretty low that new parks would be developed because of the other housing types that can be developed in those zones, in which a developer would probably, seek more profit doing that. But they could, and there would be design standards associated with that development. So it allows them to be maintained and grown over time. This is a new housing type that is considered popular because it'll fit in existing residential neighborhoods and look like a single-family house, a corner lot duplex. The requirement here would be that these are permitted in the in the R10, R8, R6 zones. So they would be compatible with low-density residential areas on the same size lots.
Oh, is that a person then can actually convert an existing dwelling unit into a duplex under this code?
They could. We call that, as I'm going to talk about next, it's called an internal conversion. So that's actually a new proposal as well. In this case, the requirement would be there's not more than one door on the front of the building. So the access to the second unit would be interior or at the side or rear of the building. So it would look like a single-family house. One moment. Duplexes is a category that, where you have, this is not an actual example, this is from a brochure, but popular option in a lot of neighborhoods that are older. Proposal is to allow duplexes in the R5, R3.5, and R2 zones under the following standards. For the R5 zone, you would be able to build a duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot. R3.5, you would have to have 3,500 square feet per unit, which is the current standard. In the R2 zone, you'd have to have 4,000 square feet to build a duplex.
Where are R2 zones? I mean, I've never,
That's a great question. We got that. I don't have a zoning map in the presentation, but an example of the R2 zone is the area next to the high school north of Glen Oak Road, Sequoia Landing and Sequoia Crossing developments, but to the west of the high school.
but we don't do R2, I mean, we don't create new R2 zones.
In the concept plan areas, yes, the areas that are designated as high-density residential in the concept plan areas would be zoned R2 if they're annexed into the city. But they don't constitute a lot of the acreage of those areas. Probably, I don't know, I'd be hazarding a guess, but there's probably about 40 acres, 50 acres total of close to 900 gross acres in the concept plan areas. This is what we were talking about earlier. The idea behind what's called an internal conversion is to preserve your existing housing stock and not incentivize it to be scraped off to accommodate a twoplex, threeplex, or fourplex. How would we do this? This would be a way to take an existing home that's at least 20 years old and convert it into multiple units. It costs a lot to do this. Commercial building code requirements kick in once you get to 4 units. But potentially you could do up to 4 units, each with its own living facilities and that sort of thing. And then more than 2 units would require compliance with commercial building codes. So the likelihood of someone actually building 4 units in a single family home is probably not going to happen from an economic standpoint, but it could be there. 3 units would be a commercial.
You say it's not possible from an economic standpoint.
Well,
Wouldn't that depend on the size of the house and what they could do?
it could depend on the size of the house and what the building code requirements are in terms of fire flow, sprinkler systems, fire separation, how much water pressure you need for the units. You may have to put in new water meters and that sort of thing. That's why I would say that could be cost prohibitive for someone to do this. That being said, we didn't want to have a barrier to this in the zoning code, and the project advisory team liked the idea of preserving existing housing stock to accommodate this sort of thing. So if you have, for example, an aging relative or kid who is living at home and you want to create something bigger than an accessory dwelling unit to accommodate them, this would allow you to do that. If you wanted to expand an existing dwelling to accommodate that type of unit, there would be a limitation on this as to how much of the existing house could be expanded to accommodate this, and that would be tracked. The recommendation from the project team in this case was to only allow this for homes that are at least 20 years old from the date of this ordinance. Currently, we define a multifamily unit as anything that's three or more units on the same parcel. With the new code, we define 3 to 4 plexes separately. These are examples of, it's like, two duplexes together. It can be designed to fit in well with single-family neighborhoods. So the idea here was to allow these in the medium-density zones and the high-density zones already by right, so that it wouldn't have to go through site plan and design review. They could just get a building permit to do this, or go through the subdivision process. Cluster housing is a new name for what we would call cottage housing. We have cottage housing code on the books since 2008, but haven't seen any of these built yet. Part of the reason may be because of the code that we have is a little stringent and prescriptive. What would remain in the code with this proposal is the requirement that you have cottage-type units, smaller housing units centered on a central open space area. This development type allows you to slightly increase the density above and beyond what is normally allowed in that zone, but it has very strict controls in terms of the overall building footprint. Currently, you can't build bigger than a 1,200 square foot living area with this code. And what we heard from the group and from some of the builders was if that was increased slightly to 1,500 square feet, it would be economically feasible development model. And the other recommendation in this case was if these cottages were allowed to be divided into separate lots, they would build them as fee simple units. They would still meet the design requirements, but they would build them. So there's slightly greater flexibility for open space and design in this case, and it's a new housing option in the R2 zone, the high density zone. All right, I'm going to skip through some of these. Multifamily housing isn't really changing in terms of the use permissions. It's going to remain permitted use in the R2 zone. But we are adding a provision that if a multifamily project is a publicly subsidized, affordable project where 100% of the units are regulated to be affordable to people who make less than 80% of the median family income, they would qualify for what's called a density bonus to add more units either vertically or horizontally to accommodate affordable housing. And that would only be applicable in the R2 zone for apartments. There's some changes to the architectural standards to simplify them. Currently, we have very complicated requirements for how a building is articulated architecturally on the exterior. The proposal here is to still have visual interest and breakup of the exterior walls so that we don't get just blank boxes. But it's slightly simpler to meet those standards. Open space requirements would be more flexible. You would be able to do a variety of open space proposals, either rooftop gardens, balconies, interior courtyards that aren't necessarily right on the street, but could be more internal to the site and those sorts of things. Those kinds of provisions we do run into from time to time where developers are just like, I can't make this happen on this site. Is there anything else I can do? So that was a recommendation coming out of this as well.
Now, if somebody were to build something with an internal open space,
Yeah.
could that reduce the setbacks that they would have?
I think that alone might not, but the setbacks for this zone are they're fairly small to begin with. I think you can put a multifamily project 5 feet from the property line. You can make it larger if you put a courtyard or a pedestrian area.
This is probably my ignorance, but
Yeah,
if I were given an alternative of having as a developer, having a internal open space versus an external one,
yeah.
it seemed to me that it would be more costly to build a structure that had an internal courtyard.
Yeah, it certainly might because of the complexity of building around it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's an option, you know. The idea here is to provide options. Also, what we call transparency or windows, this is clarifying that the minimum window requirement applies to all floors. The live-work category is not something we've seen a lot of. It's probably something that would be developed in denser urban downtown and that sort of thing. It's proposed to be eliminated from the R2 zone as a category. The reason being that it's not something that's going to be popular to build in the R2 zone. It's currently a conditional use in the R3.5 zone, and that's not proposed to change. We might see this proposed in concept plan areas, but only when those areas are fully built out and supportive of commercial use. Don't see it happening in the near future.
When you say live work, that doesn't mean the people that occupy a resident there has to be necessarily working out of their house. It's
No,
just
it's
that.
just the
No.
bottom usually.
The
commercial.
bottom
Yeah.
floor is either an office or a
We
or a clinic.
call that
Yeah.
some mixed-use development.
Yeah.
I want to just take a minute there and wonder why that really hasn't caught on in the downtown area at all.
Yeah, well, the downtown area has been challenged for residential development because of seismic requirements and some of the older buildings that would have to be seismically upgraded to accommodate residential use. And that may not be the only thing. There are some pretty steep system development charges associated with converting older buildings to residential lofts, and the market hasn't caught up yet in Oregon City. I think with the advent of the Cove development and some of the other urban renewal properties where people are proposing exactly this on city-owned property, hopefully we will get an example that other developers can point to and say, look, it can be built here. But it is fairly costly to do right now. Yeah.
But I guess on those areas, given the nature of the Cove and so forth, you use the word equitable housing and not affordable housing. My guess is the renters that are going to live on the Cove are not in need of affordable housing. It's going to be more expensive.
Right.
And my concern is, how do you incentivize these things to make sure it's directed to the segment of the population you want it to be directed to?
This is a topic that we've received a lot of discussion on with the advisory team and other people. So administering and regulating affordable housing either through rent control or some other method that the city administers is a program and administration thing that requires a lot of work, and currently we don't have the administrative capacity or staff to do that. The Clackamas County Housing Authority can, because they receive federal money to administer HUD, Housing and Urban Development, voucher programs for affordable housing. And that is potentially something that we can partner with them on in the future, but it wasn't within the scope of this project.
Let me just come down to the downtown area. You're talking about to take an existing structure and convert it into a mixed-use lift work kind of
Yeah.
such higher SDC cost.
Yeah,
It seems to me that if it's an area where there's already pretty good transit, they're probably not going to have that much impact. In fact, where they live, they may not even own a car.
That's
I mean,
true.
and why can't you look at your SDC structure and some of these things where what you're talking about is really affordable housing?
yeah,
If you got public transit available, not much parking available maybe, but,
Yeah.
these kinds of things, it seems to me there must be ways to incentivize this kind of development.
we're not overlooking the SDC question, but it's not within the scope of our zoning code rewrite to tackle that SDC impact question right now, because we want to involve the Public Works Department in that discussion and make a thorough analysis of what they're willing to accept in terms of scalable system development charges in the future. That's certainly not something that, it's definitely something we've heard from the development community about and from the public about, and needs further analysis. It's definitely on the list of things for further study. Because we know we're not going to solve the housing crisis with this zoning code rewrite. It's only a portion of the problem that affects a portion of the supply. And there's so much more to the question from a public policy standpoint than just reducing barriers in the zoning code. System development charges is certainly a big part of that, and whether you can finance them and scale them and make it more affordable to these types of projects. Exactly. That's definitely something we want to talk about as we move forward into implementation in the future. And so that's that. Part of the discussion that was raised early on was having to do with emergency shelters, warming shelters, and housing the homeless community in the times of need. Currently, the city has passed emergency ordinances for when the temperature gets below 33 degrees to suspend the zoning code, to allow for My Father's Heart and for the Oregon City Residential Home and for the other faith-based communities to operate as warming shelters. The idea with a transitional shelter would be that it would currently be potentially proposed as a conditional use in residential zones, which includes church properties in residential zones. If you're a church property and you wanted to do this permanently and offer up to 10 beds, or then you could amend your conditional use permit to do that. And then proposal to permit this by right in the mixed use zones. So this is not something that came out of the Equitable Housing Project Advisory Team per se, because it was discussed, but it was discussed. And it's something that's near and dear to a lot of the members of the community and a lot of people that came to our meetings. Some of the guidance from the project advisory team on this particular issue was that it hadn't been publicly vetted enough and needed further study. But as we go through this code adoption process, it's something that we want to talk about now because it's urgent. So there's a few other things that are code cleanup stuff, which I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about. That includes adding police stations as a conditional use in our institutional district, allowing hotels and motels as a permitted use in the mixed-use corridor district, because they're currently not. We'll be simplifying all of our process worksheets for site plan and design review. And adding some procedures that allow what I refer to as 3 to 4 plexes could potentially be permitted through what we call a type 1 site plan and design review process, but that's something we're working on. There's some discussion of permitting food carts in the Willamette Falls downtown district. And we're going to be consolidating some of our chapters into other chapters to make it simpler to find things. Height measurement will be modified so that we will only refer to height measurement in feet rather than stories. So you measure from finished grade to the top of the building. And in the floodplain, because you're required to build above the floodplain, we'd be measured from the floodplain. That's not something that currently is in the code, but has led to problems.
So if you're in a
So-
floodplain and your
Yeah.
thing would be, your dwelling would be 4 foot
Yeah,
below the
you're-
floodplain, you start from that full foot
You
up?
can have certain types of development below the floodplain that's not habitable space, like parking
Okay,
or streets or even driveways,
Okay.
that sort of thing.
You know, the Willamette Falls Community Center there on Washington is a great example of it. They did that before we had the code. But it was a good example where it's all parking underneath.
Yeah. So this would avoid, and this would basically equalize the playing field for anybody who's got to develop in the floodplain, allow them to realize the full potential of that height allowance. We currently have what's called a master plan process for institutional development, but it doesn't really address residential development and allow for innovative projects that might need adjustments from the code. So these are called planned unit developments. The idea is to amend the current master plan ordinance to have more standards for residential development and add it back in as an option for people. So you could be mixing up diversity housing type, adding open space, incorporating wetlands, shifting densities around. And that would be an option for properties in the concept plan area, but where there's bigger parcels that you could develop. They'd go to the planning commission to get approval of this, so it's not a staff level approval, it's something that would be discretionary with the planning commission. The proposal to increase the maximum height limit in the mixed-use downtown district from 45 to 75 feet. That's for properties within 100 feet of a residential unit and between Main Street, McLaughlin Avenue, 11th and 16th. That's the area shown in here.
Could you go back?
Yeah. So currently.
I'm just considering, what does that do to the view corridor?
Yeah, well, we'll have to wrestle with that question because it is within the view corridor of the Willamette River.
Yeah.
Yep. So the idea behind mobile food carts is that they would be permitted on the Willamette Falls Design District, which is the Blue Heron site. And they would be allowed for up to 5 hours within a 24-hour period. And this idea has not been fleshed out fully yet. In Portland, those are regulated as vehicles. In Oregon City, there's probably a requirement that these be hooked up to some sort of a permanent water or sewer system, which may not be feasible for them, but we'll work through that process. The other code change that would be proposed is to allow parking lots overnight to be used for general parking when not needed by businesses in the mixed-use corridor and downtown districts.
Could you go back to the previous?
Sure. So, right now, if you wanted to do a food cart pod in Oregon City, you would have to go through site plan and design review, hook up to sewer, water, stormwater, design the site with landscaping, and meet all the requirements as if you were a permanent structure. And the idea with this would be that some of those standards would still apply, but wouldn't be as onerous, yeah. There's a big public works component to this, though. So I say you take this with a big grain of salt. And I am going to talk about how this ties back to natural resources, but briefly. Finally, as far as our administrative processes in our code, There's a few cleanup items here, particularly with respect to how the city issues public notices and decision. Currently, we advertise in the newspaper, and we're not sure that that's the most effective method of getting the word out, because we already use the website, and we do mailings within 300 feet, and we use our mapping program that identifies where permits are active and that sort of thing. So we would like to change that requirement to post notices in the newspaper, just to put them on the city website. There would always be notice to the neighborhood associations and the CAC via email, rather than the current requirement to do it via certified mail. That's more of a cleanup item. And then we would remove the requirement to provide a sign-in sheet from the neighborhood meetings. So they would have to, developer would have to show evidence that they've met with the neighborhood association, but sometimes the neighborhood associations don't collect all the signatures, and sometimes not everybody signs in on the sheet anyway, and that sort of thing.
So are you going to put the Natural Resource Committee into that notification piece?
Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, I think we will.
You are, or you're going to consider it?
Well, I think we can consider it. I honestly don't have a
I think that's what we
concern with
talked
that. I
about
think
before.
we've already talked about it.
That's what
So-
I've been talking about.
Yeah. So, and we do send you email notices and
Yes,
everything.
yeah.
Yeah, look at them.
The pre-application requirement is the thing that we talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the early advice thing.
Yes.
Yeah. So, all right, the other things I'm not gonna gloss over, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time talking about that. It has to do with, application details. Currently, we have an expiration of a land division after 2 years, but that's gonna be clearer. It'll be same as any other application, which is, you can apply for an extension up to 1 year, so you basically have 3 years to submit for a building permit. We would remove the 1-year waiting period for similar applications. We don't feel that property owners who are willing to apply fully again for a project that's been denied, if they want to modify it, they shouldn't be penalized and have to wait 1 year in order to do that. We would require development to pay pending liens prior to issuance of any permit. We would remove the process for reconsideration of a final decision. This is something that is not well defined in the code, and it provides too much discretion to staff to issue decisions. Basically, this would require that a developer that's received a final decision come back and reapply rather than request a reconsideration by staff, because we have to base things on the facts. And the public has to be notified of that reconsideration rather than it just being issued. It's not something we've done a lot of for precisely this reason. The lot averaging decision was something that was talked about a lot by the Planning Commission this year. Ultimately, the provision remained in the code. When you've got a lot of constrained land, differing lot sizes and things like that, this allows you to make some of the lots in a subdivision up to 20% smaller than the average, smaller than the minimum, and some of them larger than the minimum. But the provision had been abused because of the areas that were under power lines, which were in easements, were used to a big extent to create very large lots and then average out very small lots. And the feeling was that that's not really indicative of what the minimum lot size is for those zone districts, and it creates less predictability in the zoning
Are
code.
those easements, are they actually owned by the utilities?
No, they're not.
So the point
Private
is, the
property.
person owns that property, the easement's through it, and I suppose they're paying property taxes on the size of the lot.
I don't know to what extent they're assessed on the easement area because it's not developable land. That's a good question. You're not allowed to put structures in it. You can put gardens and that sort of thing, but they're
You
limited.
can actually get paid not to plant underneath there. I went to the tree school and that was one of the subjects on how to, that was a whole class and I went there and I went, oh, that's interesting.
Finally, the code will be modified to combine our land divisions, which are minor partitions and subdivisions, into one chapter called land division. Our road maintenance standards will be separated out into an engineering manual rather than being codified. Our residential zones will be much more coordinated with the comprehensive plan. So rather than being separate chapters for R10, R6, R8, R10, R8, and R6 will all be in one chapter called low-density residential with subheadings. Just be easier to follow. And our design standards for all of these housing types will exist in separate chapters. So that's a lot of material. I apologize for the length of it. This is the upcoming schedule for the adoption. We'll be doing another work session and an open house on July 23rd from 4 to 6 p.m. at City Hall. Then at 7 p.m. on the 23rd, we'll have a second work session with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission's first public hearing is going to be August 13th. And then we've got room for 2 additional hearings. There may be more, then this schedule may be adjusted. City Commission work session on the 11th of September. And then, as you see, the remaining public hearings before the City Commissioner would be scheduled on September through the end of October, with the goal to adopt these chapters by November. The reason that there are so many chapters in there right now is if through the public hearing process, it just becomes, a particular section of the code becomes not something that either the Planning Commission or the City Commission wants to adopt, we can pull it out. Or they can modify it as need be. And we do expect that there's going to be a lot of changes to these as we go through the process. But they're all severable and easily removed. So that's the proposal. In general, providing a greater range of housing units types within our existing zoning is in line with a lot of our housing policies in our existing comprehensive plan, and I think this is the first time that we've really tackled it in the time that I've been here, since 2005. There's obviously a concern that we get this right for Oregon City. We're not Portland, and all of our community and project advisory team members feel very strongly that we want to preserve the unique quality and character of Oregon City as we go through this process. As I mentioned, there's a lot of other initiatives that we need to tackle in the future to really solve this housing project in the long term, housing crisis in the long term. And you also will be partnering with Clackamas County for a housing needs analysis. Part of the reason that we couldn't do a housing needs analysis before this project started was because the grant didn't support it, and it was perfectly obvious that there was a problem without having to do a housing needs analysis. There's plenty of evidence to support the need for this type of missing middle housing right now. We are going to follow through with housing needs analysis, partnering with Clackamas County in the coming year. And they have already secured the money from the federal government to do that, and we're part of their needs analysis. Yeah.
I want to come back to that height change there in the
In the downtown district.
downtown area.
Let me scroll back to that.
Why you're permitting that on McLaughlin and between McLaughlin and Maine rather than having it between Maine and Railroad? I don't know how much I want to interfere with looking at the river escape from the promenade, but a lot of people, walk that promenade, and one of the reasons is because you can look down on the river.
Beautiful view.
And, I don't feel there'd be as much objection to having the height increase on the east side of Main Street because it's not going to impact the view that much.
All right,
But that's front and center.
Yeah.
yeah, good point.
Um,
Yeah, I think as we move forward, we need to make that observation.
And the thing is too, that you're increasing that height. I mentioned the reason for doing that partially is so the mixed-use development having residential on top. You've mentioned that there are issues with taking an existing building, meeting the seismic requirements. Well, most of those masonry buildings have that problem anyway.
Yeah,
We might lose them all in the big quake, but the thing is, it looks to me as I look at it, you've got actually, I guess it's, you got Center Street up there and so forth, so you don't really see the bluff thing, I guess. It's a little confusing for me. But anyway, that is a concern of mine.
okay. Yeah. I'm sure this will be discussed in a lot more detail too at the work session.
Yeah.
Is that parking area right there? Or
Pardon?
that area right there?
Some of this?
Yeah,
You mean the,
ones are not addressed.
yeah, I don't know why that is. I think it may have something to do with the Subaru dealership lots, which don't have addresses. They're just under their ownership. Okay,
The thing is,
Fair to be.
down on the, I guess I need to look what the cross streets are. That, I guess none of that really is on the promenade.
No.
no,
So
I think John
I guess
Evans
it's
is
not
back
that
here.
much of an issue. None of that's on the promenade.
Unless you chose to raise those
Yeah, this
buildings.
is,
Then it would
this
be an
is
issue. And-
Sport Craft
Or
Marina.
frankly, you increase the height, you increase the value and the more likability of.
Well, when I was thinking the viewing corridor, I was talking about through the general public, but a lot of that area is residential anyway.
Yeah, the height limit is 75 feet already in the mixed-use downtown, but except within what they call the design district. And this is what I think this is a portion of this area that's called out in blue is the downtown design district. And so the idea behind the downtown design district was to preserve some of the building height with the older historic buildings that were not quite as high, but I don't know all of the public, but there's a lot of history on that, and so I don't want to speak out of turn. Okay, so thank you, and let me know if you have any questions moving forward about this project. We're going to be doing a lot more public outreach. People can get a hold of me anytime if they have any questions about it. I think that the public open house from 4 to 6 on the 23rd will have 2 sets of poster boards. We'll have poster boards that are strictly for the equitable housing side of the project, and another set of poster boards that deal with the other things that are just more code cleanup and procedural, just to help people differentiate between them. But they are interrelated, and rather than make 2 separate processes, we thought it was best to combine them. All right, thanks.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Maybe
I'm glad you brought this
interesting to watch
up.
this
That was a good presentation.
Yeah.
Thanks. I feel overwhelmed when I'm giving this presentation because there's so much material.
Oh, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how it seems to someone who hasn't been
I
working
started
through
opening
it.
up those things, I went, this cannot be done on my phone.
Yeah, no, you can't do it on a
This takes a
smartphone.
committee.
Yeah, you can barely do it on a computer. But anyway, thanks.
Okay.
And let's see. Projector mute.
All right.
All right, so.
Oh, some good information tonight, for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, can I take these to put on our little table for tomorrow night at the concert series? These little pieces of paper.
Well, they've been given to you.
Well, they're over there too. There's a whole stack of them. I'm gonna see if I can take that stack and take them
The
to
other
the
people
table.
aren't here, so they don't get them, so you can take them.
Take them theirs.
That's the benefit of being here.
You want to adjourn us?
Oh, excuse me. Oh, yes, and for one thing, yes, we need to have reports too, and I got a couple things to mention, so.
I didn't want to suck all the air out of the room.
No, thank you. I'm glad you did that. First of all, let me say is there, before we go into our individual things, is there anything for the good of the order that anybody wants to mention? Either in terms of future agenda items or anything of that nature? No. Okay. So, does anybody have some news they want to share that's relative to natural resources?
Well, other than our little city parks and what we're doing.
That's fine.
Oh, actually, Oregon City Parks Foundation is starting their bottle collective and blue bag push program, drop in for parks at the Oregon City Concert Series. So we're gonna have volunteers looking for more members and input what you'd like to see. We're gonna have a booth up there this coming Thursday at Queens Nation. And we're also going to be at the movies at our parks, passing out bags. We won't be collecting them there, but we will be collecting them at the concerts.
Yeah, on the movies thing, it might be worth mentioning, they've always been at Westerly Land, but I
Now
believe they're actually spreading them over different
Yes,
parks.
they're making notices between Wesley Lynn, Chapin, and the end of the Oregon Trail, and then Wesley Lynn. So they're moving them around to our various different parks, which
Yeah.
So you
will
can go-
include
you
more
can go-
neighborhoods.
Yeah, you can go to the first one and then learn where the others are going to be.
And they're giving away, and we will be passing out these wonderful little magnet schedules at the first concert in the park series. So, bring your bottles. One change that the concert in the parks is doing, just because of the success for it, is they're gonna be charging, they have a little map on these flyers. Pick one up wherever you can, the library, city hall, various different places, because it has the free parking on the backside of where it is. They're charging $5 now to park down in the main area. However, that will be throwing right back into our parks.
Right.
So it's a positive, but shelling out $5 when you didn't do it last year will be a surprise to people, but it is for a good cause. And,
I think you'll see some pushback on that.
oh, I'm sure there will be. I tried to suggest, bring a bag, donate it, and Oregon City Parks will pay you $5 for it and pay for your parking. But that was just too confusing for them, maybe in the future. Nothing like a blue bag full of garbage.
I
Or
unfortunately have
recyclables,
not been
deposits.
around much, so I don't have much to say.
I got a couple things to announce. One is a benefit. The Oregon, as people, I think, some people know at least, the Oregon City Brewing, not pub, but this.
Oregon
company.
City Brew Pub, on Tuesdays when they do their
Yeah.
benefits.
Their name isn't pub though, it's something else. But that's the place on 15th Street. The benefit on the 17th is going to the Clackamas Partners of the Watershed Councils. And that
Yay.
involves the Oregon City Watershed Council, North Clackamas, Johnson Creek, and then the Clackamas Basin Watershed Councils. And $1 of each beverage you drink, whether it be an alcoholic beverage or non-alcoholic, goes to the group.
I'll see you there.
Okay?
What date's that? What date's that?
That's this coming Thursday.
This Thursday,
No, this coming Tuesday.
this coming Tuesday.
Yeah,
Okay.
Tuesday is when they have their benefits. The Greater Oregon City Watershed Council has gotten a grant to actually deal with it, to actually bring in professionals to deal with the invasives at Abernathy Creek Park.
Great.
And we've been there working on that for some time, but it's just almost impossible to keep up with. And There's also, funds have been redirected. We've been having stream surveys done on Abernathy below Monopo Dam, and that's the dam with Beaver Lake above on Reese Road. Yeah, you might have gone by that.
Yep.
The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife has been, has really become more interested in Abernathy with our involvement there. And they actually did work on the ladders going up into that dam. And we know now there are, in fact, Coho are getting up there with those improvements. They were not expensive improvements, but they seem to have had benefit. And we're redirecting monies to go ahead and do a stream survey of the tributaries that are above the lake there. And they're very long tributaries and are probably, some have some of the best spawning potential because they're more forest covered and so forth. So we'll be having a survey done up there probably next year of that area, and both in terms of temperature monitoring and also for determining the juvenile fish populations that are up there and where they're distributed.
Excellent.
Cool.
I love your signs. I just didn't realize how many streams we have and how
Yeah,
far they
that's
reach.
great.
But that was-
And I want
that-
more of them. I want to say, I want to see more. And
Well,
now I look at other areas and say, I think there's a stream over there in other cities. I'm starting just to look in areas through
That
neighborhoods
was,
and going.
that was one of the big trigger points for us going in
Yeah.
this direction, because people don't know how many streams there are flowing through the city.
Right.
And I think they have made a difference in perception.
It has a mind, and I know that I look at other areas going, I know there's a stream where all those berry bushes are growing because it ravines there and it's heading towards the river. And I'm thinking, that needs to be identified. So thank you very much.
Well, we have more funds available for signees, but we're trying to work with the county to have county put some of the stream crossing signs there in the county. Oregon City Public Works has been very easy to work with. The county has been a little difficult, and the state highways are impossible to deal with.
Well, maybe we can work with the Oregon State Parks Foundation and put something in some of those parks where you can sit and enjoy the stream. You know, something that we're collectively together.
Sure,
Yeah.
that'd be great.
Super.
Got a nice, we don't put a sign on it because it's, by the time it gets to a roadway that it's already culverted. And so
Yeah.
you don't see it at the street level, but, there's some nice work on the stream there in Hellendale. It's a real nice stream, and, they've been doing plantings and so forth there, so, yeah, there's a lot of them that we've got.
Yeah.
Well, with that, anything else to add, Peter?
No,
With that, I
Okay,
will
adjourn.
officially close the meeting, and I'm glad you drugged me back.